The worst year for a lot of us for our mental as well as physical health. So joining us this morning is best-selling author, coach Lisa Goldenthal.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa G, your host. You're at the top of your game, yet the game is changing faster than ever. Strategies that got you here aren't the ones that'll keep you here. The pressure is relentless, and the fear of obsolescence looms large. That's why I'm here. Welcome to the new podcast series, Disrupted: How to Be Gritty and Unlock Performance in Business, Mindset, Wellness, and Success to help you master disruption.
Thanks for coming, and I'll see you soon.
He's a 5 times international bestselling author, men's physique champion, and co-founder of BioLongevity Labs. After a devastating sports injury, it exposed the limits of conventional medicine, and he dedicated his life to mastering the science of vitality. Today, he's recognized worldwide as a leading authority in hormone optimization, therapeutic peptides, longevity, and empowers people to break free from sick care and reclaim their energy, mindset, and purpose using proven tools, not gimmicks. I'm thrilled. Welcome to WholeCEO with Lisa J. Campbell.
Hi, Lisa. It's awesome to be here. And after I think I canceled on you like twice now, I'm really honestly humbled and grateful to be here today. And this is going to be an amazing show. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, that is in the past. I'm happy to have you here. I'm actually obsessed with this topic. So I appreciate having you here. We could talk about my favorite topics of longevity, and your journey began after a sports injury. So what was like the turning point that made you reject conventional medicine and seek a different path?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it was. It's a long story, so I'll make a really super 100,000-foot high level version. At 29, I got kicked in the testicles playing basketball. I was an ex-college and had a short cup of coffee playing professionally. So I still played very competitively, but I checked myself out. You know, you get kicked in the balls or the nuts and you're like, and you keel over. But about 8 weeks later, I started feeling incredibly run down. And I was all at that time, I was literally a month from turning 30. And I had no idea what was going on with me. I was a very conditioned athlete, but so I went to a PPO, insurance doctor, because at that time I worked in advertising for the Los Angeles Times in Southern California. And as I like to think in the world, there are no coincidences, but only synchronicities. This guy referred me to an endocrinologist, and it happened to be a guy who was a Harvard educated and world-renowned endocrinologist, which there are a lot of those people in Southern California. And his name was Dr. Raymond Scruggs. And he took my labs and he said, dude, you have the testosterone levels of a 90-year-old geriatric. He's like, I can put you on therapeutic testosterone and I'll have you right as rain in 8 weeks. But before you say yes, go home, talk to your fiance who was about to be my wife, and, get her approval. And so you guys could do this together because there is a little work involved. And so I did. And she said, of course. And just as he promised, he said within 8 weeks, I would feel amazing. I did. And my low back pain went away, and all the, issues, the aches and pains I was dealing with went away as well. And so when I went back to see him, he was like going to take me off. And I was like, bro, you're not taking me off. This is like the greatest thing that I've ever experienced in my life. Like, this is transformative. I want to stay on and I want to learn more. So at that point, I was about 30 years old and 3 months. And this is in 1999, probably maybe now 2000. And there was no information, Lisa. There was nothing. I mean, there was a couple of books written on using therapeutic testosterone and growth hormone and other stuff. And they were written by a guy by the name of Nelson Virgil, who was actually writing about it to survive because he had AIDS. And at that point in time,
God.
AIDS or HIV was a death sentence. And so the men that were with this, diagnosis were using everything and anything under the sun to survive. And so there was a lot of research, which is funny now flipping to today about it, but the Russian sports research and Bulgarian strength people had tons of research on testosterone because they had been using it with their athletes for decades.
Right.
But back then there was no AI. And if you wanted to read it, you had to be able to translate Russian and Bulgarian, which was nearly impossible. So as I tell people, the only thing that was available were underground, Usenet anonymous forums. Some were for bodybuilding, some were for performance enhancement, some were for biochemistry. And at that point in time, which was again 2001, 2002, the internet actually had a very good signal to noise ratio. It was mostly signal, whereas today is all noise.
Right.
And so the people that I was collaborating with anonymously were masters of the game. I mean, they were like me. They were biohacking, experimenting on themselves, guinea pigging, as I called it. And so we were all just collectively learning about testosterone and learning about all these other drugs and these molecular agents. And at the same time I was learning about testosterone, I was learning about peptides. And so when I tell people that I was using peptides in 2003, it's kind of hard to believe because the average person in the world doesn't even know what a peptide was until like 2 or 3 years ago. So anyway, to fast forward a long story, I finally wrote my first book in 2014. It wasn't published until 2015. And it was basically because the people in my inner circle were like fascinated by my knowledge of all these things. Now, at the time, I was still working in automotive, or I should say digital marketing, which eventually became automotive and then real estate, where I met my lovely wife, who was in residential real estate. And at that time, the inner circle people in my life were like, dude, you got to write a book on hormones. And so I finally wrote the book. There was a long story of how it almost didn't get written, but eventually once it got published, it exploded into mainstream consciousness, through Amazon's book, reviews and all that stuff. And then at that point I'm in now 2016, I'm like 44 years old, 45 years old. I started meeting people through the book writing, and I started lecturing at medical conferences. My 2 testosterone books, after that book, the first book was called the DRT Manual. The next book was a book on fasting, which was called the Metabolic Blowtorch Diet. Both of them were, very well received and well read and highly sold on Amazon. But my true magnum opus masterpiece was the Testosterone Optimization Therapy Bible, which came out in 2018. And that book is still the #1 selling book of all time on therapeutic hormones. In fact, every physician in the world who's anybody in this space uses or refers to that book still to this day. And it's kind of funny because that book is out of date. I mean, I wrote it literally almost 10 years ago now, but it's still the top of the food heap. And then from there, I wrote a couple other books. And in 2023, at the end of January, literally the last day of January, I published my first book on peptides. And this is a truth, Lisa. I tell people this all the time. A lot of people are like freaked out when I say this, but the reason it exploded into mainstream consciousness beyond all my other books was people were looking for alternative forms of healing from the vax.
Oh, yeah.
And it was right in ground zero of all these people being harmed. And so they're looking for alternative therapies. And obviously peptides was, top of the food chain, top of the list. And my book just exploded. And so since that point, which is now almost 3 years, which is crazy to think that book is almost now 3 years old, I've been the peptide guy. I'm lecturing all over the world. I've been on panels. I've been invited to do podcasts like yours, talk shows, etc. And so now I'm writing what I think, or I don't think I know, will be my true magnum opus, which is a book on GLP-1 peptides. And we can talk about that because obviously I know you said you were interested, but I can just tell you this right now. The average person on this planet that has used a GLP peptide has completely done it wrong. Really? And the doctors that have prescribed them to them have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, what they're doing. They do not know how to give them proper dosing instructions. And of course, the pharmaceutical companies have made it worse because the pharmaceutical companies, as you know, want to make money. And so they start people at a high dose. Exactly. Yeah. They start people at a high dose and then they titrate them higher and they completely whack out their they saturate the receptors. They completely stop the ability of the peptide being effective. And then all the side effects and stuff that you've heard about, in the mainstream news about the GLP peptides, Wegovy face, Wegovy neck, Wegovy butt, muscle loss, thyroid disaster, metabolic crash, etc., thyroid malfunction. All of it is true, but it could all be alleviated if people knew how to dose these things appropriately. And so that's why I'm writing my book, because I'm going to go through scientifically and say, this is how you do it wrong. This is the science. This is the evidence. This is what has happened. This is the quote from so-and-so celebrity doctor. And this is how you do them accurately. And here's 100 people. And I will have probably, somewhere between 25 and 50 before and after transformations of people doing it correctly. And so my goal, and I know it's going to work, is just to literally have the first ever treatise on like what not to do and then how to do it right. So there's the mainstream person, the lay person actually has something that will show them from soup to nuts how to use a GLP peptide and not harm themselves.
Okay, well, let's just break this down to the 14-year-old level. Like if you
Yeah.
were talking to a teenager, why don't
Yeah.
we just start at the beginning and explain a little bit what these GLP peptides actually are
Yep.
and what testosterone therapy can do for both men and women
Yeah.
and why it's needed today.
Yeah. It's a great question. So start with hormones. So every person, in my opinion, in the West over the age of 40, and I would even say it can be younger, but let's just say 40, start there, should get their blood work done at least once yearly because we are living in the most contaminated environment in the history of the world. From the air
Right.
that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat, the
Yeah.
blue light that you and I are dealing with right now. I mean, it's just a contamination field everywhere we go. And the number one thing it's doing is it's disrupting our body's what is known as the hypogonadal pituitary axis, which is what keeps our hormones being balanced and optimized. So almost everyone is dealing with some form of testosterone deficiency by the time they're 40. And that includes men and women. There's no difference.
Right.
So that's kind of the first step is like you've got to get your lab work done. You don't have to go to a doctor. You can go to various companies, private MD labs, discounted labs, direct labs. There's so many different companies that you can just go online and order a laboratory test. Again, you could do a female hormone panel, a male hormone panel. I partner with private MD labs and I've done a deep dive and created a bunch of different labs for men and women to make it simple. But once you have that, armed with that information, now you can kind of make an informed decision as whether or not you need therapeutic hormones. And again, like I said, 80% of people do. And most men and women never ever get it diagnosed. And because again, their average garden variety insurance doctor knows nothing about this kind of stuff. So unfortunately, they just give them, blue or pink pills for erectile dysfunction, and then they give women SSRIs, and it's just a mess. But
Yeah.
if you could get a physician, and they're out there, thankfully, especially in the United States, that can optimize your hormones and start you on the right, path. And the right path
Yeah.
is for most men and most women, it's therapeutic testosterone. It's some form of thyroid optimization. And then it's, something like metformin or something like dihydroberberin or even Jardiance, which is the newest one. But you got to look at all three elements. You've got to look at your endocrine system, which is obviously the testosterone, progesterone, estradiol. And then you got to look at your thyroid, which is your master temperature gland. And then you got to look at your insulin production, which is coming from your pancreas. So if you optimize all three of those things, and it's really simple to do, and most of the doctors that do this for a living understand how to do it, you're going to be on the right path. And then from there, we can start talking about, if you have a lot of fat to lose, which is most people nowadays, you can look at a
Right.
GLP-1 peptide. And to answer your question, a GLP-1 peptide is what is called a glucagon-like peptide. And what that means is in our body's digestive tract or digestive system, we have this temperature. It's really more metabolic and appetite regulating peptides. And that's what our
Right.
GLP or glucagon-like peptides. And as we get older or we eat and we don't treat our body well, that erodes and we don't
Yeah.
have much of production of that. So by using a glucagon-like peptide, again, a GLP-1 peptide, we can do a lot of different things depending on the actual peptide. The first stage one, which is called a GLP-1, is just appetite suppression. And I think most of your listening audience probably has heard of Wegovy or semaglutide, which is again the primary one that insurance is prescribed. And all it does is suppress appetite. It's still effective, but it doesn't do any of the things that the newer GLP-2s and the GLP-3s do. And so the GLP-2 is the one that also a lot of people are familiar with, which is the better form, which is called Mounjaro or Zepbound. And that's actually a GLP peptide called tirzepatide. And
Right.
tirzepatide, in addition to suppressing appetite, also increases metabolic rate through the stimulation of glucagon peptide, which is glucagon is essentially like um, an adrenaline like peptide that increases metabolic rate. So with the
Right.
stage 2, you get appetite suppression and you get you get a metabolic rate bump, which really means for the people listening, while you're sitting here on a podcast or sitting at your desk or working, you're burning calories at an accelerated rate while you're at rest. So obviously that's great for fat loss. It's great for improving metabolism and improving insulin resistance. And then the third one, which I love to talk about, which my company sells, is GLP-3, which is trade named retatrutide. Now, this product is not yet FDA approved, although it should be, because they have tons of clinical research and tons of success in the clinical research with people using it. But the difference from that one is it's got appetite suppression, glucagon stimulation, and then it also activates what is known as white fat in the upper back. And white fat is basically converting to brown fat, and brown fat also stimulates metabolic rate. So you're hitting 3 separate pathways of optimizing your metabolism. So when you use this drug, again, retatrutide, in a microdose, and we'll get to microdosing in a second, it does all the great things that anybody as they're aging wants. It kills food noise. It improves your metabolism. It helps with nutrient partitioning and insulin signaling. So for people that are eating right and lifting and exercising and doing all the things, it actually improves metabolism. So it does
Wow.
so many amazing things. So it's one of these drugs where, I talk about all the time. It's probably the greatest drug in the history of the world, but it's not yet experienced by a lot of users because it's not FDA approved. You have to be really advanced and, using like research peptides, or just have a friend like myself who talks about these things. And so you can go down that path, but they really are amazing. And I think that in the next 3 to 5 years, as more and more people become used to them, adopt them, because when they're FDA approved, that will happen. They're going to help so many people. I mean, they've already helped hundreds of thousands, but soon it'll be millions, and then it'll end up being the tens and hundreds of millions.
And what about the negative side effects? Are you talking about microdosing so that you're not losing muscle mass because you're taking the testosterone? And one of the benefits of that is you're going to be not losing muscle mass as we age. You're not going to be losing energy as you age, but you want to hold on to that muscle as we age. I do. So important, and my audience does.
Yep.
So let's talk about the negative side effects of some of the other drugs. We're not going to actually mention the name, but you know what they are that are out there.
Yeah. So it's a good question. So in truth, getting back to what I was saying, there really aren't side effects if this is done right. But
Okay.
if you go to a doctor who doesn't know what they're doing, which is the majority, so again, majority of people do experience side effects, they're going to do what the pharmaceutical company wants them to do, which is start at a high dose and then escalate the dose. And what ends up happening for the people listening here is that you saturate your receptors. And what that means is, in the biomedical space, we call it receptor attenuation. And so essentially, if you use a GLP-1 or a GLP-2 and you take too high of a dose, what
Right.
first happens is it suppresses your appetite unbelievably well. And so now, and this is most people, you stop eating, which is a huge no-no, because your body still requires protein. It still requires carbs. It still requires essential fatty acids. And if
Yes.
you're one of these people taking this super high dose that your doctor slash pharma rep, gave him him or her the instructions to use, you might go 2 or 3 days without eating. And so all these people are doing this.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I'm telling you, over time, and then the next week or the next 2 weeks, they escalate the dose even more. So people will go 10 days without eating food.
That's
So
going to
you
shut their metabolism rate down, isn't it?
exactly. So you can only imagine how bad this really is, right? Because then all these people are not eating food. They're not getting protein. In the case of women who are not eating, their hair's falling out. Most of them, as we already talked about, have a testosterone deficiency, which is not being addressed. So
Right.
they're losing muscle at an accelerated rate because, again, these peptides are very efficient at what they do. They do stimulate metabolic rate. They do suppress appetite really well. So obviously the user, and obviously, let's be honest, most of these people have fat to lose. So when they first start taking it and they stop eating and their weight drops, they're like, it's working. But they don't realize that they're not eating protein and they're not eating enough food. And so, as you just said, they slow their metabolic rate down. They create thyroid catastrophe because they slow their thyroid gland down. They crash their thyroid oftentimes. And so 4 to 6 weeks later, they've taken this way high dose, They've saturated the receptors. They're not eating enough food. And now they're about to face metabolic hell, as I call it, right? Their
Oh,
thyroid
yeah.
crashes. They've lost muscle. Their face has collapsed. Their butt has collapsed.
Oh my
They're just,
God.
they're just a disaster. But all of this could have been avoided if the physician or the functional medicine doctor, whoever it was that prescribed them initially, told them the following things. And I have a document that I call the 10 commandments of GLP use, but I'm not going to go all into 10 because they're kind of esoteric, but there's 3 to 4 rules that you have to follow. And
Okay.
number one is you have to microdose. If you start off on these super high dosages, all the negative things happen. Appetite suppression, nausea, an inability to eat, lack of energy because it whacks your electrolyte levels, it whacks your micronutrient levels. And then the 5th horrible thing is you get delayed gastric emptying and terrible, like what is called gastric motility. So you have people that don't have bowel movements,
Ooh,
right? So it's like
so you're losing the
horrible.
muscle and you're having digestive issues and all for the sake of trying to get healthier and lose a few pounds.
It's all insane. So again, if number one, you microdose,
Right.
and let's just say we'll talk about tirzepatide. Again, that's the stage 2. Mounjaro or Zepbound. People are familiar with that. Instead of taking 2.5 to 3 milligrams once a week, you literally take 1/6 to 1/8. If you're a man, I would say 1/6. If you're a woman, 1/8 of a dose, 2 to 3 times a week. So instead of that one giant, spike bolus dosage on Monday and then wait a
Yeah.
week, right? And of course, people don't understand the half-lives of these drugs. They're really long. So if you take a big dose, and again, I'm giving you like a baby dose, right? It's still too
Right.
much, but a baby dose is like 2.5 to 3 milligrams. These people are taking 10, 15. Don't even get me started. It's insane what happens, but it goes up and then it stays up. And so again, they're nauseous. They don't eat. They don't want to eat. They're fat. They're losing weight initially. And so like, this is great, right? But if you just take a microdose
Yeah.
of this tirzepatide, which is, again, I'll give it to you, in a man, it's probably like 0.25 to 0.35. In a woman, it should be like 0.1 to 0.15. So again, this is literally 1/6 to 1/8 of a normal weekly dose. And you take it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. What happens is it increases metabolic rate. It eliminates food noise. It doesn't overwhelm your receptors. It doesn't stop you from eating. Your
Yeah.
body knows that it still needs protein and carbs and essential healthy fats. And because it does all these amazing things in the brain, it gives you energy and motivation to exercise. So
Wow.
all the people doing this the right way are experiencing all of these amazing benefits, right? They're lifting weights 3 or 4 days a week. They're doing their cardio. They're getting enough protein because they know their body is required to eat the protein because their energy is improving, right? So it's like, oh, I got to eat more protein. So they're doing it right. The other couple of things, obviously, and I just mentioned them, but you definitely have to lift weights because it's such an effective drug in increasing metabolic rate that you can't afford not to exercise, right? If you don't lift weights and do resistance training and stuff like that, you can suffer muscle loss. So obviously you got to do at least a couple days a week. I mean, obviously I think 3 days a week for most Americans or healthy people is normal.
Yeah.
And then you also should be doing cardiovascular training, obviously for the heart as you get older, but and also to help with fat loss. And then most importantly, we already talked about this, is you really, if you're going to use a GLP-1 peptide, and this is some of the smartest doctors in the world are saying this now, you have to be hormonally optimized. Because if you're not hormonally optimized, as you already said, the muscle loss is much more prevalent because of the increase in metabolic rate and obviously eating less calories, obviously because of the appetite suppression. So it's kind of the way to offset losing muscle. And I think just to say to your audience, if you lose 1 pound of muscle in a
Right.
week, it affects your metabolic rate in about 150 to somewhere 300. And even in bigger people, more, heavier bone people, it can be up to 400 calories a day less that you're burning. And when you add that up over the course of a week, a month, a half a year, that's a lot of calories that you're not burning. So you don't ever want to lose muscle when you're using GLP peptides. And there's a lot of research out there that says that you don't have to lose a single ounce of muscle if you do all those things. But again, how many people are getting that advice and getting those instructions from their doctors about eating enough protein, getting hormonally optimized, lifting weights. Almost none.
Oh yeah. I'm
Almost none.
drinking the Kool-Aid. Like that is the way I live. And the fasting, which
Yep.
I mean, I could
Yeah,
talk to you
fasting is amazing.
forever. Um, but I know it's a short podcast. Do you want to deep dive into a little bit of intermittent fasting or fasting?
Sure. Sure. I mean, I love to talk about fasting. So, just to add into that GLP adventure, fasting for both man and a woman is awesome, not just for the metabolic health benefits, the autophagy, the hormesis, getting rid of senescent cells, but also because it will increase the production of fight or flight hormones. And the fight or flight hormones stimulate or mobilize the poor blood flow areas where people have stubborn body fat. So the areas where men and women are prone to store fat are usually around the belly for men and the hip, hamstring ratio in women. So it's like, it's they call it estrogenic fat deposition in the lower back and in the lower hamstrings and legs, where women get like cottage cheese dimples, et cetera. When fasting, you're going to increase, again, those catecholamines, those fight or flight hormones that will mobilize that stubborn fat. So there's really nothing better than being able to fast. I always tell people this. And by the way, the statistics and the science show this. If you can fast 2 days a week, up to 18 hours a day. And, if you want to go longer, be my guest, it's better. You
Yeah,
will live longer than people who can't.
absolutely. I've been
It's
doing this for
100%
years.
fact.
I'm like a huge believer in intermittent fasting
Yes.
for
Yes.
longevity. And it's just a pleasure talking to you, Jay Campbell. Where can people find you, your books, all of your peptides? This is like fascinating because there's so many reasons that people need to do this right in this
Yep.
day and age.
100%. So people can find me on social media at jcampbell333. That's pretty much every social platform. I have a domain that anyone who watches my podcast can download all my books for free. It's jcampbell.com/free dash info. And you can download every single one of my books. And then I also have links to BioLongevity Labs, which is the company that I own, which is, very fast becoming probably the Amazon for biohackers, because we have 96 different products and every single product is class leading. As we like to say, tip of the spear. And if you want to use an affiliate code to save 15% off, please use Lisa G, and all those amazing products can be yours for 15% off.
Well, I'm going there myself, Jay Campbell. I'm going to check
Awesome.
you out. And thanks for being a fabulous guest on Whole CEO with Lisa G.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.